The year marks the 45th anniversary of the May 18th Gwangju Democratization Movement. In the 5th episode of Diplomat's Archives Hidden Stories, we'll be exploring the history of democracy in Korea and another nation. A country that shares similarities with Korea, yet has walked a different path in its democratic journey. It is none other than South Africa.
So first, could you briefly introduce yourself to our viewers?
Oh, okay. Thank you. My name is Cindy Swa Mkoko. I'm the ambassador of South Africa to the Republic of Korea. I am here to introduce commonalities and similarities between the democratization processes of South Africa and those of South Korea.
"31 years ago, in April 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election. For the first time, Black South Africans were granted the same voting rights as white South Africans.
It was, first and foremost, the right to exercise that democratic privilege and right to vote and choose your government, which was not given to the Black community of South Africa. So to be part of that was really an excitement.
To understand South Africa's struggle for democracy, there's one crucial thing we need to know first: apartheid. For some 40 years, South Africa was ruled by a white minority government since 1948. And it institutionalized racial discrimination by enforcing a policy of racial segregation known as apartheid in 1948. Apartheid means apartness in Afrikaans. At its core, the system was designed to segregate and discriminate against people based on their race. Under the apartheid system, white South Africans enjoyed superior rights in every aspect of life, while Black South Africans faced systematic discrimination in all areas. We connected with an expert based in South Africa via video call to gain deeper insight into the process of South Africa's democratization. Professor Ngumezulu is a scholar with research interests in international relations, foreign policy, comparative politics, and so on.
It officially began in 1948. That is when one of the apartheid leaders, called Dr. D.F. Malan, won an election under the National Party ticket. And then after assuming office, he wanted to consolidate segregation laws, which were already there. And then amongst Black people, then the government also started separating them according to ethnic groups. And then each of them had to reside in a particular geographical space. So in 1948, then that is when apartheid was formalized as a government policy.
Blacks, making up about 80% of South Africa's population, strongly resisted these policies. However, the white minority government suppressed their resistance with violence.
It was a series of events that led to the movement intensified towards the end of apartheid. And I can just highlight a few. 21st of March, 1960. That is the Sharpeville Massacre.
The Sharpeville Massacre. Under the apartheid system's passed laws, not only black people but also other people of color were required to always carry a passbook when leaving their designated areas. In response, thousands of black people gathered in front of the Sharpeville police station in 1960 to protest. They were demanding arrest for not carrying their passbooks. As the crowd grew, the peaceful atmosphere of the protest began to escalate. In response, the police even used machine guns to suppress the demonstration, resulting in 69 deaths and around 200 injuries.
The second turning point, I would say, was the 16th of June, 1976, where a group of high school students were killed by the apartheid regime because they resisted being taught in Afrikaans. Afrikaans is the South African language that is only spoken in South Africa and Namibia, and it has its origins from the Dutch language when the Dutch people arrived in South Africa, so they have developed their own language that is called Afrikaans.
During the apartheid era, Afrikaans was a symbolic language of authority used by police officers and administrative officials to enforce the government's policies. At the time, black students were being taught in their indigenous languages. There were hardly any textbooks in Afrikaans, and there was a severe shortage of teachers who were proficient enough in the language to conduct lessons. On June 16th, students in Soweto began a street protest, and soon more students joined in, increasing the crowd to about 10,000. The police attempted to disperse the crowd with tear gas, but they started firing live ammunition as the crowd began throwing stones. The Soweto uprising escalated over the next 2 days, from June 16th to the 18th, resulting in at least 176 deaths, with some estimates reaching up to 700 casualties.
Then we can fast forward that then to the 1976 uprisings, where the students came into the picture. So then they decided to revolt against Afrikaans being used as the medium of instruction. Then we had what was called the Soweto uprisings. But before then, you already had another event which was started by the PAC, which was revolting against the past laws. So now we have two important moments. Then this then led to the international community getting involved because they realized that the apartheid government was killing a number of students, unarmed students. Then the international community came into the picture.
In order to hold its first democratic election in 1994, South Africa had to overcome some of its greatest obstacles, namely its white minority regime and its racial segregation policy. However, the barriers that Korea had to overcome in its path to democratization around the same time were somewhat similar, but at the same time also different. As the Korean War came to an end in 1953, Korean society was facing a period of rapid change. We became curious about Korea's situation from the perspective of another country. So we reached out to an expert to ask. John Dunn, Professor Emeritus at University of Cambridge, is one of the leading global scholars in political theory and political philosophy.
I think that Korea was, of course, literally a huge battleground. The whole peninsula was a huge battleground for a long time. Terrible devastation was caused. Millions and millions of lives were ruined. Those were circumstances in which starting to establish any form of democratic rule was bound to be extraordinarily difficult. What was most distinctive, really, about Korean democratization was the long period of military dictatorship and the extreme difficulty of escaping from that.
At the time, South Korea's first president Lee Seung-man did not hesitate to enforce authoritarian rule in order to solidify his political power. He also tried to extend his regime through illegal constitutional amendments and rigged elections. Then, in April 1960, the April 19th Revolution broke out. The April 19th Revolution, which took place from February 28th to April 26th, was a nationwide pro-democracy movement against the Lee Seung-man regime, which was initiated primarily by students. As citizens joined the protests, the movement grew in scale and led to many casualties as police responded with violent suppression. Lee ultimately stepped down from power as the result of the April 19th revolution. However, because the revolution's aftermath was not properly prepared, it remained incomplete. And on May 16th, the following year, a military coup took place, toppling democracy before it could take root. This marked the beginning of a military dictatorship in Korea. Nevertheless, civic resistance continued in the years that followed. We decided to meet with an expert to gain deeper insights into the development of democracy in Korea. Professor Han Sang-jin introduced a new theory called Jungmin theory in the 1980s. The theory distinguished the driving force behind Korea's democracy as being different from the middle class or the general populace and named it the middling grassroots.
그래서 우리나라는 1960년에 4.19 혁명으로 이제 민주주의가 확립이 됐는데 61년에 군부 쿠데타가 일어났고 1972년에는 유신 체제가 확립이 돼 가지고 박정희 대통령의 영구 집권 체제가 됐어요. 그래서 정치적으로는 탄압식이에요. 암흑식입니다, 이게. 그런데 특이한 점은 뭐냐면 경제기획원이 그 당시에 아주 막강한 어떤 권력을 가지고 유능한 관료들이 총 모여가지고 경제계획을 실시했어요. 그래서 1960년대부터 시작한 경제 발전이 70년대까지 거의 연평균 10% 정도의 발전을 계속해요. 놀라운 발전이에요, 이게. 근데 이렇게 놀라운 발전을 한 결과가 뭐냐면 굉장히 빠른 속도로 말하자면 중산층, 중간계급이 등장한 겁니다. 그 중산층이 드디어 그냥 경제적인 만족, 경제적인 성과에 만족하지 않고 표현의 자유, 정치적 자유를 요구하기 시작한 겁니다. 그래서 우리나라가 갖고 있는 특징은 뭐냐면 빠른 속도로 경제 성장하는데 성공했다. 또 그 기간 동안에 끊임없이 대학생들 중심으로 해서 이러한 그 독재 체제에 대해서 또는 불평등한 산업 발전에 대해서 반대하는 시위가, 항의가 계속되었다. 이 두 가지가 굉장히 특징적이에요. 다른 나라에서 발견하기가 조금 어려운 특징입니다.
After President Park Chung-hee declared the Yushin Constitution in 1972 to pursue permanent rule, he was assassinated in 1979. Just as the country was beginning to hope for the return of lost freedom and democracy under his regime, on December 12, 1979, another military coup took place, this time led by Chun Doo-han and his new military faction. Then, in May 1980, the May 18th Gwangju Democratization Movement occurred. And our team visited Gwangju to learn more about the May 18th Gwangju Democratization Movement. In Gwangju, we met with Choi Jung-gi, the director of the May 18th International Research Institute. He has been researching the May 18th democratization movement for many years.
우리나라에서 권위주의 체제가 약화되고 민주화가 진행되는 과정을 보면 가장 결정적인 계기가 5.18이었다. 이렇게 정리할 수 있을 것 같습니다. 되게 세 가지 이유라고 저는 생각하는데, 하나는 우리나라에서 최초로 권위주의 체제를 되돌리려고 하는 노력에 국민들이 아주 목숨을 걸고 저항한 그 사례였고, 그 경험이 그 이후에 시민들은 물론이고 군부 세력들에게도 계속 경종을 울리는 그런 사건이었다는 점입니다. 두 번째는 5.18은 비록 그 5월 27일 날 군부의 군합발이 짓밟혔지만 그게 곧바로 5.5 운동으로 되살아나면서 지속적으로 그 5공화국의 아킬레스건으로 작용했고 결국은 그 때문에 5공화국이 붕괴되는, 그래서 한국의 민주화가 들어서는 그 계기가 됐다는 점이고요. 세 번째는 1980년대 말부터 시작된 게 5.18에 대한 과거사 정리였습니다. 우리나라 최초로 이제 과거사 정리가 시작된 건데 그게 다른 여타 사건으로 계속 확장이 됐습니다. 한국전쟁이 민간인 학살할지, 부마 민주항쟁이랄지, 4.19랄지 우리나라 정치적 지형을 상당히 바꿨다고 저는 생각합니다.
The May 18th Gwangju Democratization Movement was a pro-democracy movement that took place in May 1980 in Gwangju, Jeollanam-do Province. It was led by protesters who were against the military regime. They demanded the abolition of martial law and the establishment of a democratic government. At the time, the military regime brutally cracked down on the people of Gwangju, deploying airborne troops and using indiscriminate gunfire against the citizens. However, the enraged citizens did not retreat, courageously resisting the violent military forces. Between May 18th and 27th, at least 150 civilians lost their lives on site, and more than 80 are still missing to this day. Thousands were injured, and over 100 people have died since 1980 due to the long-term effects of their injuries sustained at the time.
That is one of the moments in the history of South Korea that reminds me of the various massacres that I've referred to in South Africa. This was a determination from young students to say that democracy in our time and stand against anything that changes that. It is a moment that reminds me of those young teenagers in June 16 that I have mentioned in South Africa. So those are the parallels that I'm drawing between the two.
Koreans have long fought against authoritarian and dictatorial regimes through movements all aimed at establishing democracy. As a result, in 1987, Korea overcame its long-standing authoritarian system and won the right to direct presidential elections. South African citizens also fought for a long time against apartheid. Their resistance, along with economic sanctions imposed by major countries opposing apartheid, began to cause cracks in the system.
The highlight towards our democracy was the release of the political prisoners. I would mention the group that was released in October 1989, which included the likes of Mr. Walter Sisulu, Raymond Mhlaba, Ahmed Kathrada, Elias Motsoaledi. Those were some of the struggle stalwarts. And the highlight of which was the 11th of February 1990, when President Mandela was released. And that was a watershed moment.
After Mandela walked out of prison as a free man after 27 years, apartheid was officially abolished on June 17, 1991. And in 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections, in which Nelson Mandela was elected as the first Black president of South Africa. Mandela, the symbol of South African democracy. He led the African National Congress in fighting against oppressive apartheid policies and spent 27 years in prison as a result. After his release, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993, becoming a symbolic figure in the global human rights movement. In 1994, he was elected South Africa's first black president and chose to emphasize reconciliation rather than purging the perpetrators of oppression. As such, he is often praised as a politician who personally practiced forgiveness and reconciliation.
After having been released from prison, he called a meeting with the widows of his oppressors and he had tea with them. Others within the ANC and the alliance were saying that, no, you can't do that. These are the wives of the people who incarcerated you for so many years, 27 years to be exact, but now we are calling them for tea. He said, you know what? People are not born hating each other. They are taken through a process on how to hate. And he argued that if you can be taught how to hate, you can also be taught how to love. Those were powerful words which then settled down in the minds of many South African politicians, and they to change their mode of operation. Instead of returning fire with fire, they were now prepared to sit down around the table and then try to build a better country so that at least there would be political tolerance. There are very few people who do that.
There is a Korean politician who had a special relationship with Nelson Mandela. That politician is former President Kim Dae-jung. Kim was a politician who led Korea's democratization movement and reconciliation with North Korea. He served as the 15th President of the Republic of Korea.
성실히 수행할 것을 국민 앞에 엄숙히 선서합니다.
He entered politics in 1950 and until the 1980s led the democratization movement against the military dictatorship. During that time, he endured many hardships as he was imprisoned several times, went into exile twice, received a death sentence, and narrowly escaped death, including being kidnapped.
But I had two very long meetings with him. I found those conversations absolutely spellbinding. I mean, we talked about a very wide range of things. He wanted to talk to me about, I suppose, about international relations in all its complexities, about world politics and about Korea within world politics, and about how to build a more democratic and a more less unjust society in Korea. Kim Dae-jung had lived a very rough political life, and Korean politics, throughout his lifetime had been very rough. There had been two really serious attempts to kill him. So I think, he wasn't, his political instincts were very competitive. In general, I thought, as his presidency went on, a very large proportion of what he was doing was very well considered.
Many people see numerous similarities between President Kim Dae-jung of Korea, who was also awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000, and President Nelson Mandela of South Africa.
아시다시피 남아공화국과 우리나라는 정치적으로나 문화적으로나 사회적으로 역사적으로 다 다릅니다. 그래서 만델라와 DJ가 유사한다기가 어렵죠. 근데 이제 유사점이 있기 때문에 그런 말이 나올 것 같습니다. 그것은 뭐냐면 두 사람 다 20세기의 인류에게 가장 큰 어떤 악의 체제였던, 한쪽은 이제 인종차별이고 한쪽은 독재 체제였겠죠. 이것과 지속적으로 싸웠다는 것이죠. 두 번째는 그 지속적으로 싸우면서 엄청난 탄압을 받았다는 점. 세 번째는 그런 싸움 끝에 결국 두 사람 다 정치적으로 승리했다는 데가 있습니다. 네 번째는 그러면서 그 사람들이 끊임없이 보편적인 가치를 내세웠다는 거예요. 보편적인 가치를 내세우면서 그것을 지켜왔다라는 점에서 아마 사람들이 유사하다라고 평가를 하는 것 같습니다.
Well, there are some things which they did definitely have in common. They were both political prisoners for a very long time. And I mean, in general, being a political prisoner for a very long time for, politicians who are of less courage and less sort of clarity of purpose, usually has a very bad effect. But I think both Mandela and Kim Dae-jung came out of prison sort of politically unspoiled, very decent and admirable and sane purposes they'd had. I mean, they both were exceptionally brave men. I don't think anybody doubts that. And they both were very intelligent men. And they both had a sort of vision for their countries, which wasn't an easy thing to have and to keep.
The place we're currently conducting the interview with the South African ambassador is the Kim Dae-jung Library, located in Mapogu, Seoul.
All these beautiful letters from the world. Wow.
We took a look around here for a while with the ambassador. And there's something special on exhibit here.
And the watch, the gift from Madiba. This is a wristwatch from former President of the Republic of South Africa, Nelson Mandela.
(1997년 9월) 말에 제가 이제 서울대학교 사회학과에서 강의를 할 때 김대중 후보를 일일 강사로 초빙을 했어요. 그래서 그분이 이제 왔습니다. 아시아 민주주의와 인권이라고 하는 걸 칠판에다가 놓고 강의를 딱 40분 했어요. 그리고 35분 토론을 했습니다. 그런데 그때 학생 하나가 진짜 과감하게 나와서 질문을 했어요. 민주주의를 얘기하고 인권을 얘기한 사람이 이렇게 수많은 그런 부정과 그다음에 인권 탄압을 했던 군부 독재자들을 용서하고 이게 뭐 하면 한다고 하니 이건 말이 되는 얘기입니까 이게?
In September 1997, then presidential candidate Kim Dae-jung pledged to pardon Chun Doo-hwan and No Tae-woo, who were convicted of treason in connection with the 1979 coup and the Gwangju massacre in 1980, corruption, and other offenses.
김 선생이 딱 보더니 학생 말이 옳다. 학생들은 젊은 나이고 충분히 그렇게 생각할 수 있다. 그런데 가해자가 설사 용서를 구하지 않는다 하더라도 어떤 경우에는 피해자가 가해자를 용서할 수 있다. 그게 피해자가 갖고 있는 특권이다. 라면서 그걸 설명을 해요. 우리가 앞으로 만들어야 되는 것은 새로운 정치 공동체인데 과거에 잘못한 사람이 그 잘못된 행위로 인해서 그 사람 자체가 배제가 되고 이렇게 소외가 된다고 하면은 그것이 또 다른 불행을 가지고 올 수 있는 소위가 있다. 그래서 우리가 할 수 있는 좋은 특권은 뭐냐면은 바로 그런 사람들까지를 포함을 하는 새로운 정치 공동체를 만드는 것이 우리의 임무이고 또 그걸 위해서는 용서할 때 과감하게 용서를 해야지 된다라고 하는 그분이 갖고 있는 평소의 정치 철학입니다. 이게 그걸 그때 이제 과감하게 학생들한테 얘기하더라고요.
In 1995, President Kim Dae-jung translated Nelson Mandela's autobiography into Korean. While doing so, he wrote the following in the book. The background to the deep friendship that transcends borders between Kim and Mandela may lie in their shared message of reconciliation and forgiveness. Both Korea and South Africa overcame difficulties to establish democracy. However, in 2025, democracy faces significant challenges around the world.
I mean, there are different sorts of challenges. I mean, one challenge to democracy as a governmental project is the same as the challenge to any governmental project, which is to sort of handle the life circumstances of the population effectively. So the better. I think that the big threats to democracy everywhere come from failure. I think if governments have failed a large proportion of the population for a long time, that is very threatening to democracy, because democracy is just a basis on which to try to govern a country. And if that basis has been misgoverning, that does challenge the idea that it's a good form of regime. But I mean, there isn't a better way of governing a country than democracy. There are just sort of more and less successful attempts to govern countries democratically.
우리나라에서 최근에 아마 다 바라보는 것들인데, 가령 비상계엄 선포를 했단 말이죠. 근데 그 비상계엄이 계몽령이다고 막 이런단 말이죠. 민주주의는 사실 굉장히 허약한 체제 같아요. 굉장히 허약한 체제고 제도적으로 절대 완성되지 않은 체제 같습니다. 그 사회를 좀 열린 사회로 만들어야 된다고 생각합니다. 그 열린 사회로 만들지 않으면 민주주의 내용을 채워나갈 수가 없을 것 같고, 채워나가지 못하면 그것은 곧바로 다른 시스템으로 갈 수밖에 없습니다.
In today's episode of Diplomat's Archives Hidden Stories, we explored the histories of democratization in Korea and South Africa. Though distinct in many ways, the democratization history of Korea and South Africa share one powerful truth. The people of both nations endured hardship and pain in their struggle to achieve and preserve the values of democracy.
시민사회를 보면은 역시 젊고 패기가 있는 새로운 어떤 지식 욕구가 많고 창의력이 있는, 그리고 자발적인 헌신적인 젊은 세대들이 우리나라도 그렇고 남아공에도 있고 성장하고 있다. 그래서 김대중과 만델라 대통령의 정신을 잇는 그런 운동이 이 젊은 세대로 뻗쳐나가서 젊은 세대가 서로 교류를 해서 남아공과 대한민국 미래를 바라보고 서로 교류하고 협력하는 좀 긴 안목의 교류와 협력 사업이 많이 좀 일어나면 훨씬 더 보람이 있지 않겠느냐, 이런 생각을 해봐요.
We have shared values. We understand the principles of democracy, and it helps us to move together seamlessly because we espouse similar values and we know that we stand together and share the values of democracy.
We often speak the word democracy with ease, but have we truly taken time to reflect on what values democracy is meant to uphold? As we mark the 45th anniversary of the May 18th Gwangju Democratization Movement, may we take this time to honor the countless lives sacrificed in the name of democracy and to reflect on the kind of society they truly hoped to build.